A group that got told they'd never make it, formed through a survival show where 2 members got eliminated on camera, debuted under a mid-tier label with 0 public recognition, spent years being called noisemakers by critics who refused to take their music seriously. That group now holds a record that no artist in the entire 70-year history of the Billboard 200 has ever achieved. 8 consecutive #1 debut albums. Not BTS, not Taylor Swift, not the Beatles. No one had done that before Stray Kids walked in and did it like it was routine. They went from playing small venues to selling out 27 stadiums across 5 continents on a single tour, moving over 2 million tickets at a 99% sell-through rate, grossing $260 million. They write, compose, and produce their own music, over 200 songs registered under 1 member alone. And every step of the way, someone was waiting for them to fall. This is the story of 7 moments where Stray Kids didn't just prove the doubters wrong, they made the doubt itself look ridiculous.
Number 7, the noise they couldn't silence, Stray Kids. In an industry built on formula, where agencies handpick your songs, hire outside producers, approve every note before it reaches a studio, Stray Kids showed up and said, "No, we'll do it ourselves." And the industry laughed. 3 of their members, Bangchan, Changbin, and Han, formed a production unit called 3 Racha back in 2016, while they were still trainees at JYP Entertainment. Not artists yet. Not debuted, just teenagers in a practice room who started uploading original tracks to SoundCloud on a bi-weekly schedule, 2 songs every 2 weeks, 1 original composition, and 1 sample-based remix. They performed live at a small underground venue in Seoul called the Ugly Junction in July 2017, months before anyone outside of a niche internet community knew their names. By the time Stray Kids officially debuted in March 2018, their internal production team had already built a catalog from scratch, and the group's very first EP, I Am Not, carried their fingerprints all over it. That was the statement from day one. We write, we compose, we arrange. We are not a product someone else designed. But here's the thing about doing it your own way in K-pop. You become an easy target. And the target came fast. The word critics used was noise, not constructive feedback, not a genre label, just noise, as in, this isn't music, this is a headache. That tag chased Stray Kids for years, and it hit its peak in 2019 when they dropped Side Effects, a psytrance-driven, bass-heavy track with jarring transitions and 0 interest in being radio-friendly. Online communities tore it apart. They called it construction music, pots and pans, said it lacked melody, said a self-produced idol group had no business making sounds this chaotic. What those critics missed is that Side Effects was never trying to be comfortable. It was a conceptual piece. The production was intentionally disorienting because the song was about anxiety, about the mental weight of growing up under pressure. And 3 Racha built the instrumental to mirror that exact feeling. They chose art over approval. And most groups facing that level of backlash would have course-corrected, softened the edges, hired a safer outside team, gone for the radio single. Stray Kids did the opposite. In August 2021, they released their 2nd studio album and named it No Easy, a wordplay that slams 2 meanings into one title. Read it one way and it sounds like noisy. Read it another and it says no easy. They took the exact insult that was thrown at them and turned it into the name of the record. The lead single was called Thunderous, which in Korean translates to sorikun, a word that literally refers to traditional pansori performers, artists whose entire craft is about projecting powerful sound. That was the message. You called us noisy? Fine. We're the loudest performers in the room, and we're proud of it. And here's where the numbers buried the criticism. No Easy sold over 1.1 million copies within 8 days of release. That made it the first million-selling album in the entire history of JYP Entertainment, a label that launched Wonder Girls, 2PM, GOT7, and Twice. None of those acts, as commercially dominant as they were in their eras, had crossed that threshold before Stray Stray Kids did it with the very album the haters inspired. It debuted at #1 on the Gaon album chart. It topped iTunes charts in over 50 countries. All 14 tracks from the album entered the top 40 of the Gaon download chart, not just the single, the entire album. Meanwhile, the group that was supposedly making unlistenable music kept stacking credits at KOMCA, the Korea Music Copyright Association. By 2023, all 3 members of 3RACHA were promoted to full members of the association, a distinction granted to roughly 25 to 30 creators per year, requiring a proven track record of both prolific output and royalty earnings. They became the first 4th-generation K-pop idols to ever receive that status. As of early 2026, Bangchan alone has over 230 songs registered, Changbin has over 180, Han has over 170. Across their entire discography, the group's members contribute to 100% of writing credits and over 90% of composition credits. In an industry where performing songs written by others remains the standard operating model, where creative control is a privilege most idols never receive, Stray Kids built their identity on refusing to outsource their voice. And every member contributes, not just 3RACHA. The vocal line writes lyrics, the dance line has produced unit tracks, the entire group has evolved into a creative organism where self-production isn't a marketing line, it's the foundation everything else is built on. They didn't just survive the noise label, they weaponized it, and the album that proved it became the biggest their agency had ever seen. If that's what happens at #7, imagine what's still coming.
Number 6. From 347,000 to 5 million in one shot. Stray Kids. There's a number that tells you everything you need to know about where Stray Kids started. 347,000. That's roughly how many albums they moved in their entire first year, 2018, across all releases combined. For a group from JYP Entertainment, one of the big 3 agencies in K-pop alongside SM and YG, that number was decent, respectable, survivable, but it was nowhere near dominant. And in an industry that treats sales figures like a scoreboard, decent doesn't protect you from the whispers. The whispers said JYP's boy group slot was cursed, that the agency's strength was girl groups, that Stray Kids were a niche act with an aggressive sound that would never cross over to the mainstream. And to be fair, those whispers had context. Their debut EP, I Am Not, didn't chart on the Billboard 200 at all. Their music was experimental in a market that rewards polished pop formulas. They were competing for attention against groups backed by agencies with bigger promotional budgets, more established international pipelines, and louder media machines. In 2019, their annual sales grew to roughly 623,000, a solid jump, but still a number that kept them in the conversation without putting them at the center of it. Then 2020 happened. That year, Stray Kids crossed the 1 million mark in annual album sales for the first time, approximately 1.17 million units. It wasn't a fluke or a single viral moment, it was the compound result of a growing international fanbase, STAY, that was organizing, streaming, and purchasing with genuine conviction. The fanbase wasn't just consuming content, they were building infrastructure. Fan-run translation accounts made Stray Kids' Korean and English content accessible worldwide. Fan projects coordinated bulk purchasing across dozens of countries. And all of it was organic, driven by actual affection for the music, not manufactured hype. By 2021, annual sales nearly tripled to around 2.89 million. That was also the year No Easy dropped and became JYP Entertainment's first ever million-selling single album. But the acceleration was just getting started. In 2022, Stray Kids pushed past 6 million in annual album sales, more than double the previous year, and by October of that year, their cumulative career album shipments had already crossed the 10 million mark. They achieved all of this before 5-Star even existed.
Then came June 2, 2023, the day JYP Entertainment confirmed that 5-star Stray Kids' third studio album had officially surpassed 5.13 million pre-orders, not sales after release, pre-orders, before a single person outside of the production team had heard the finished album. Over 5 million copies were already committed. That number broke the all-time K-pop pre-order record, surpassing the previous benchmark set by 17's FML at 4.64 million. Stray Kids became the first K-pop act to ever cross the 5 million pre-order threshold. Think about what that means. The industry had spent years watching album pre-order records climb from 1 million to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4. Each jump took years and usually required the biggest names in the genre to achieve it. Stray Kids didn't just nudge past the record, they blew past 5 million on an album the public hadn't even listened to yet. That's not a sales metric, that's a trust metric. Over 5 million people put money down based entirely on the belief that whatever Stray Kids made would be worth owning. And the album delivered. 5-star debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, continuing the streak they had started with Ordinary in 2022. It was certified quintuple million by the Korea Music Content Association. And when the International Federation of the Phonographic Industry, the IFPI, the global body that tracks music sales worldwide, released its year-end report for 2023, 5-star ranked as the number 2 best-selling album on the entire planet. Not in K-pop, not in Asia, globally. Only Taylor Swift's 1989, Taylor's version, sold more. Let that context settle. A group that moved 347,000 albums in their debut year was now sitting directly behind the most commercially powerful artist in Western music on a global sales chart. The growth trajectory from 2018 to 2023 is not a gentle slope, it's practically vertical. 347,000 in 2018, 12 million in 2023. That's not a 30 or 40% year-over-year increase, that's a roughly 35-fold multiplication in 5 years. And what makes this growth different from a one-album spike is that it never reversed. Every single year from 2018 to 2023, annual sales increased over the previous year. No dip, no plateau, no correction, just a continuous upward line that kept steepening. Critics can debate music taste, they can argue about genre preferences and production choices, but you cannot debate a growth curve like that. You cannot call an act niche when 5 million people pre-order their album before the first track drops. You cannot call them a mid-tier performer when only one artist on the entire planet outsold them in a calendar year. The numbers didn't just silence the haters, they made the entire argument irrelevant. And that was only the beginning of 2023, because what Stray Kids did next put them in a category the Billboard charts hadn't seen in 70 decades.
Number 5. The government's stamp of approval. Awards in K-pop come from all directions. Fans vote, industry panels deliberate, streaming platforms tally numbers, and broadcast networks hand out trophies on live television. But there's one award in South Korea that doesn't come from any of those sources. It comes from the government itself. The Korean Popular Culture and Arts Awards is an annual ceremony hosted by the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism and organized by the Korea Creative Content Agency. It has been running since 2010, and its entire purpose is to formally recognize individuals and groups who have made measurable contributions to the development of South Korea's cultural identity and its global influence. This is not a popularity contest. There is no fan voting. There is no album sales threshold you cross to automatically qualify. Recipients are selected through an evaluation process that weighs career duration, domestic and international impact, social reputation, and direct contribution to the spread of Hallyu, the Korean wave. The awards are structured in a 4-tier hierarchy.
At the top sits the Order of Cultural Merit, the highest cultural honor the South Korean government can bestow. That's what BTS received in 2018. Below that is the Presidential Commendation. Then comes the Prime Minister's Commendation, and at the entry level, the Minister of Culture, Sports, and Tourism Commendation. On October 21, 2023, at the Haerum Grand Theater inside the National Theater of Korea in Seoul, Stray Kids were announced as recipients of the Prime Minister's Commendation. They became only the 7th K-pop group in history to receive this specific honor, joining a list that includes Girls' Generation, who received it in 2011, and 2NE1, who received it in 2012. To put the timeline in perspective, Girls' Generation got their commendation roughly 4 years after the peak of their commercial dominance with G and I Got a Boy. They were already considered national icons by that point. Stray Kids received the same honor just 5 years after debuting, in the middle of their commercial explosion rather than after it. The timing says something important about the velocity of their impact. And here's the detail that makes the story even more layered. Stray Kids couldn't even attend the ceremony. On the exact same day they were being honored at the National Theater of Korea, they were across the city performing for a sold-out crowd at the Gocheok Sky Dome as part of their 5-star dome tour. They had to choose between collecting a government award and performing for their fans, and they chose the stage. JYP Entertainment released a statement on their behalf in which the group said, "We sincerely thank you for giving us this meaningful Prime Minister's Commendation. We hope that our music and performances resonate with our fans, both domestically and internationally, and that they find energy and connection in our music and stages." No dramatic speech, no trophy moment on camera, just a group that was too busy doing the exact thing they were being honored for to stop and accept the recognition in person. Now, why does this matter in the context of silencing haters? Because the criticism Stray Kids faced for years wasn't just about musical taste, it was about legitimacy. The noise label wasn't just a genre complaint, it was a coded way of saying this group doesn't belong in the serious conversation, that their music was too chaotic to represent K-pop properly, that their experimental sound made them outliers rather than standard-bearers. The Prime Minister's Commendation doesn't care about genre debates, it cares about measurable cultural contribution, and by the government's own evaluation criteria, Stray Kids had done enough in 5 years to earn the same recognition that took legendary acts a decade or more to receive. The same year they received this commendation, Stray Kids were also named Next Generation Leaders by Time magazine. They won Best K-pop at the MTV Video Music Awards for S-Class. They took home the top K-pop album trophy at the Billboard Music Awards for 5-star. They became the first 4th-generation K-pop boy group to hold large-scale dome tours across South Korea and Japan. They crossed 2 billion streams on Spotify, and they appeared on NHK's Kohaku Utagassen, Japan's most prestigious year-end music broadcast, an institution that has been running since 1951 and selects its performers based on cultural relevance and public impact. Each of those achievements individually would make for a strong year. Stacked together, they form a wall of evidence so dense that any remaining criticism starts to sound less like an opinion and more like denial. When your own government, a 70-year-old Japanese broadcasting institution, America's biggest music magazine, and the global Billboard charts all independently arrive at the same conclusion in the same 12-month window, that's not hype, that's consensus. And consensus is what happens right before the conversation permanently shifts from "are they legitimate" to "how far can they actually go?" The answer to that second question was about to get loud, and it started with the awards that K-pop values above all others.
Number 4. The Daesong Avalanche. If you follow K-pop even casually, you've probably heard the word Daesong. It translates literally to grand prize, and in the Korean music industry, it is the single highest honor an artist can receive at any given award ceremony. Every major show,
Mama, Golden Disc, Seoul Music Awards, Asia Artist Awards, hands out dozens of trophies across categories each year. Daesong Awards go to roughly 10 to 12 top artists per ceremony. But the Daesong sits above all of them. It's the one trophy in the room that says you weren't just good this year, you were the best. The criteria are typically a combination of commercial performance, expert evaluation, and fan engagement, but the weight of the Daesong goes beyond metrics. In K-pop culture, winning one is treated as a career-defining event. It's common to see veteran artists break down in tears on stage the moment the announcement is made, because everyone in the room understands what it represents. Years of work compressed into a single validation that your name belongs at the very top of the conversation. For Stray Kids, that conversation started in 2021. At the Asia Artist Awards that year, they took home their first ever Daesong, Performance of the Year. It was a meaningful milestone, but it was also a single win at a single ceremony. Enough to prove they could compete at the highest level, not quite enough to silence the skeptics who argued they were benefiting from a weak field or riding a temporary wave of hype. The skeptics had a template for their argument. A group wins one Daesong, the fans celebrate, and then the momentum fades as the next big act steps forward. That's the cycle a lot of groups go through. One Daesong, maybe two if they sustain it, then the industry moves on. Stray Kids didn't follow that template. They shattered it. In 2022, they returned to the Asia Artist Awards and won Album of the Year, a different Daesong category from the previous year, proving the first win wasn't a fluke, but the beginning of a pattern. Then came 2023, and the wins continued stacking. Then 2024 brought the Hanteo Music Awards Best Performance Daesong and the Asia Star Entertainer Awards Grand Prize. But it was in 2025 where the accumulation turned into something that looked less like a winning streak and more like a systematic sweep. At the Asia Artist Awards, Stray Kids took home 2 Daesongs in a single night. Artist of the Year in the Singer category and Album of the Year, 2 grand prizes from one ceremony. At the Korea Grand Music Awards, they won both Grand Record and Grand Honors Choice, again 2 Daesongs at the same event. At the K-World Dream Awards, they received the K-World Dream Daesong as Best Artist. And then came Mama. The Mnet Asian Music Awards is arguably the most globally recognized K-pop award ceremony in existence. It has been broadcasting since 1999, and its Daesong categories, Song of the Year, Album of the Year, and Artist of the Year, are treated as the industry's equivalent of the Grammys' top prizes. For years, Stray Kids had attended Mama, performed at Mama, won multiple secondary awards at Mama, but the Daesong had eluded them. That changed on November 29, 2025, at the Kai Tak Sports Park in Hong Kong. Stray Kids won Album of the Year for Karma, their first Mama Daesong. When the announcement was made, the members were visibly overwhelmed. Bang Chan appeared stunned. Multiple members were in tears. Seungmin delivered a speech reflecting on the group's journey and the crossroads they had navigated to reach that moment. They also used the platform to express condolences for a tragic fire that had recently occurred in Hong Kong, a gesture that deepened the emotional gravity of the moment beyond the trophy itself. Less than 2 months later, in January 2026, they stood on stage at the 40th Golden Disc Awards, held at the Taipei Dome, and won the Album Daesong again, this time at one of the oldest and most prestigious award ceremonies in K-pop history. The Golden Disc Awards have been running since 1986. Winning their grand prize puts you in a lineage that includes virtually every major act in the history of Korean popular music. By the time the 2025-2026 award season concluded, Stray Kids had accumulated Daesongs across the Asia Artist Awards, Mama, the Golden Disc Awards, the Korea Grand Music Awards, the K-World Dream Awards, and the Hanteo Music Awards. They weren't just winning at 1 or 2 ceremonies, they were sweeping the entire landscape. And the pattern of those wins tells its own story. They didn't just win the same category on repeat, they won Performance of the Year, Album of the Year, Artist of the Year, Grand Record, Best Artist, multiple ceremonies, multiple categories, multiple evaluation criteria, and the conclusion was always the same. The group that got dismissed as noisemakers 3 years into their career was now being recognized as the best act in the industry by virtually every major panel that exists. That's what made this particular achievement so devastating to the haters. A single daesong can be debated, a handful can be contextualized, but when every major award-giving body in K-pop independently arrives at the same verdict across different categories, different criteria, and different years, that's not a trend, that's a coronation. And coronations don't happen in quiet rooms, they happen on stages that seat tens of thousands of people, which is exactly where the next achievement took Stray Kids.
Number 3. 27 stadiums and a world that ran out of seats. To understand the scale of what Stray Kids pulled off with their Dominate World Tour, you need to understand where they were just 2 years before it started. In 2022 and 2023, they ran the Maniac World Tour, a strong, successful run of 42 shows across Asia, North America, and Australia. Solid numbers, growing demand. But the venues were arenas, indoor spaces, the kind of rooms that held 10 to 20,000 people. The entire Maniac Tour had exactly one stadium show, a single encore performance at BMO Stadium in Los Angeles. One. That was the ceiling in 2023. Then the Dominate Tour launched in August 2024, and the ceiling didn't just move, it disappeared. 56 shows, 34 cities, 5 continents. 27 of those venues were stadiums. From one stadium on the previous tour to 27 on the next. That's not incremental growth. That's a leap so large it doesn't have a normal comparison in the touring industry. Most acts spend a decade slowly graduating from clubs to theaters to arenas to stadiums. Stray Kids did the arena to stadium jump in under 2 years, and they didn't test the waters with a few stadium dates sprinkled into an arena schedule. They built the entire tour around stadiums from the start, and every single one of those stadiums had to be filled. This is where the distinction between booking a venue and selling it out matters. Anyone with enough financial backing can book a stadium. The question is whether 50, 60, 70,000 people will actually show up. For the Dominate Tour, the answer was yes, with a sell-through rate of approximately 99.99%. Over 2.15 million tickets sold across the entire run. $260 million in gross revenue. Those aren't K-pop numbers. Those are global touring elite numbers, the kind of figures that put you in the same conversation as the biggest Western touring acts on the planet. Billboard ranked Dominate among the global top 10 tours of 2025, not top 10 K-pop tours, top 10 tours, period, making it the highest-ranking tour by any K-pop artist that year. The regional breakdowns tell the story even clearer. In North America alone, the tour moved 491,000 tickets across 13 shows and grossed $76.2 million, making it the highest-grossing and best-selling tour leg by any K-pop act in North American history. They played Wrigley Field in Chicago, T-Mobile Park in Seattle, Nationals Park in Washington, D.C., Camping World Stadium in Orlando, Globe Life Field in Arlington, Texas, where they became the first artist to hold 2 consecutive solo back-to-back concerts at the venue, and Rogers Stadium in Toronto, where they were the first act ever to perform at the newly opened concert-only facility, a show that also broke the record for the largest K-pop concert in Canadian history. In Europe, the numbers were equally historic. 8 shows, 391,000 tickets, $64.5 million in revenue, the highest ever recorded for a K-pop act touring Europe. They played the Johan Cruyff Arena in Amsterdam, becoming the first Asian act to sell out the venue and setting the record for the largest K-pop performance in Dutch history.
They headlined Deutsche Bank Park in Frankfurt, the first Asian act to do so, making it the largest solo concert by a Korean act in German history. They filled the Riyadh-era Metropolitano in Madrid, becoming the first Asian act to hold a standalone stadium concert of that scale in Spain. They performed at the Stade de France in Paris for 2 nights. They closed the European leg at the Stadio Olimpico in Rome, and in London, they became the first K-pop group to perform at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, 2 sold-out nights at one of the most iconic venues in English football. Latin America added another layer, approximately 400,000 fans across 8 stadium performances in 5 countries. In Mexico City, they became the first Korean boy group to sell out 2 consecutive nights at Estadio GMP Seguros, drawing 115,000 fans over 2 shows. They performed in Santiago, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Lima, each venue packed, each market representing a region where K-pop stadium touring had barely existed before Stray Kids showed up and made it look routine. And then, on October 18th and 19th, 2025, they came home. The Dominate Celebrate encore shows at the Incheon Asiad Main Stadium, Stray Kids' first ever solo outdoor stadium concert in South Korea, 7 years after their debut. Both nights were completely sold out. The stage was designed with a protruding structure shaped like the word 8, a callback to the mini-album that had fueled their 2024 momentum. The setlist ran nearly 3 hours, over 30 songs, including material from Karma, their most decorated album to date. Critics had once called them a niche act, an arena-level group at best, too experimental to command mainstream audiences at scale. The Dominate tour didn't just respond to that criticism, it buried it under 2.15 million ticket stubs scattered across 27 stadiums on 5 continents, with a sell-through rate so close to perfect that rounding would make it 100%. And every seat in every stadium was filled by someone who chose to be there. That's not manufactured demand. That's a fan base so large and so committed that the only limit on attendance was how many stadiums exist. But stadiums only prove you can draw a crowd. What Stray Kids did on the American charts proved something the music industry had never seen before.
Number 2, the record nobody had touched in 70 years. The Billboard 200 has existed since 1956. That's 7 decades of tracking album sales in the United States, the single largest music market on the planet. In those 70 years, every giant you can name has walked through its doors. Elvis Presley, the Beatles, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Eminem, Taylor Swift, Adele, BTS. Thousands of artists across every genre, every generation, every era of how music has been consumed, from vinyl to cassette to CD to digital download to streaming. And in all that time, across all those artists and all those technological shifts, not a single act had ever debuted at number 1 with their first 8 consecutive entries on the chart. Not one, until Stray Kids did it. The streak started on April 2, 2022, with Ordinary, a mini-album that earned 110,000 equivalent album units in its first week, with 103,000 of those coming from pure album sales. That figure represented the biggest sales week for any album in the United States at that point in 2022. And here's the part that made it hit even harder. Ordinary wasn't Stray Kids climbing up from a lower position. It was their very first entry on the Billboard 200. They had never appeared on the chart before. Their previous releases hadn't charted there at all. And their first time showing up, they walked straight to number 1. They became only the 3rd K-pop act in history to top the Billboard 200 after BTS and Super M. 6 months later, Maxident debuted at number 1, same chart, same position, 2 number 1s in the same calendar year. Then 2023 arrived.
5 Star, the album that broke the all-time K-pop pre-order record, debuted at number 1 in June. Rockstar followed in November, also debuting at number 1. With Rockstar, Stray Kids became the first act to have their first 4 charting albums all debut at number 1, since Alicia Keys achieved the same feat between 2001 and 2007. 4 for 4. No misses, no dips to number 2 or 3. Every single release, straight to the top on arrival. In 2024, the streak continued with 8 and Hop, both debuting at number 1, 6 consecutive number 1 debuts. They had now officially surpassed BTS, Linkin Park, and the Dave Matthews Band, each of whom had held 6 number 1 albums on the Billboard 200 in the 21st century. Stray Kids held the record for the most number 1 albums by any group on the Billboard 200 in the entire 21st century. But the streak wasn't done. In 2025, Karma debuted at number 1. 7. Then Do It, released in November 2025, debuted at number 1 with 295,000 equivalent album units in its first week. 8. 8 consecutive albums, every single one debuting at the summit. No artist in the 70-year history of the Billboard 200 had ever achieved that with their first 8 chart entries. Not a solo artist, not a band, not a Western act, not an Asian act. Nobody. Let that register for a second. The Billboard 200 isn't a niche chart, it isn't a regional list. It is the definitive measure of album performance in the country that invented the modern music industry. The acts who have historically dominated it, the Beatles with 19 number 1s, Jay-Z with 14, Bruce Springsteen with 11, they all had albums that didn't debut at the top. They had releases that entered at number 3, number 7, number 15, and then climbed. The consistency of debuting at number 1 every single time is a different kind of achievement. It means there is no ramp-up period, no slow build, no reliance on chart momentum. Every album arrives with enough first-week demand to beat everything else in the American market immediately. And Stray Kids didn't do this with English-language pop records designed for American radio. They did it with Korean-language albums rooted in experimental hip-hop, EDM, and genre-blending production that most industry analysts would have told you has limited crossover potential. They didn't adapt their sound to chase the chart came to them. By reaching 8 number 1s, Stray Kids joined a lineage that includes the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Led Zeppelin, among the very few groups in chart history to reach that threshold at all. They are listed alongside names that defined entire eras of Western music, and they arrived there by releasing music in a language that most of the American market doesn't speak, produced largely by 3 of their own members in a studio at JYP Entertainment. The people who once called them noisemakers, the critics who said their sound was too abrasive for the mainstream, the skeptics who argued a 4th-generation K-pop group from outside the Big 3 hierarchy could never sustain American chart dominance. They all watched as Stray Kids put their name on a record that had stood unclaimed for 70 years, and did it 8 times in a row without ever missing. But there's one achievement left, the one that ties this entire story together, and it starts in a place no one would have expected a record breaker to begin.
Number 1. The kids who were never supposed to make it. Rewind to 2010. A kid from Sydney, Australia walks into a JYP Entertainment audition. He's barely a teenager. He passes. He moves to Seoul alone, starts training on April 11, 2011, and enters the system that will define the next 7 years of his life. His name is Bang Chan. For 7 years, he trains. 7 years of dance practice, vocal training, language study, and watching peers debut while he stays behind. He watches GOT7 form and launch. He watches Day 6 move forward. Group after group gets assembled around him, and each time he's not in the lineup. 7 years of almost, 7 years of not yet. Then, in 2016, still a trainee with no debut date in sight, he does something unusual. Instead of waiting for the company to build a group around him, he starts building one himself. He handpicks the members he wants to work with, teenagers he believes in, and forms a production unit called 3racha with 2 of them. They start writing, composing, and uploading original music to SoundCloud, operating like an underground crew inside a corporate entertainment system. JYP takes notice. In 2017, the agency greenlights a survival show titled Stray Kids, 9 trainees, 1 goal, debut together. But survival shows need drama, and drama needs casualties. In episode 4, Lee No is eliminated. The reason? He lacks confidence and made mistakes rapping, a discipline that wasn't even his specialty. He was a dancer being judged on a rapper's terms. The remaining members are visibly shaken. Then, in episode 8, Felix is eliminated. The reason? His Korean isn't good enough. Felix, who had moved from Australia to Korea to chase this dream, is sent away because of a language barrier. Bang Chan, the leader who had personally chosen him, is devastated. The footage of that moment is still some of the most emotionally raw content in survival show history. 2 members gone, the group incomplete. And then, in episode 9, both are brought back. JYP acknowledges the group feels incomplete without them and gives them a final chance. All 9 perform together, all 9 make it. Stray Kids officially debut on March 25, 2018, with the EP I Am Not. And immediately, the world tells them they aren't enough. Their sound is too aggressive, their domestic digital numbers are too low, they can't crack Korea's mainstream music charts. They're called noisemakers. Their experimental production is dismissed as chaotic, messy, unlistenable. Online communities debate whether a self-producing 4th-generation group from JYP has any real future. The casual Korean public doesn't know their names. The industry treats them as a niche act, respected by fans, invisible to everyone else. And here's where the story turns into something that doesn't follow any script. Because Stray Kids didn't pivot. They didn't soften their sound to chase domestic approval. They didn't hand their music to outside producers to manufacture a hit. They kept writing. They kept producing. They kept performing like every stage was the last one they'd ever get. And year by year, the numbers started to move. 347,000 albums in 2018, 623,000 in 2019, 1.17 million in 2020, 2.89 million in 2021. The year No Easy turned the noise insult into a badge of honor and became JYP's first ever million-selling album. Then 6.1 million in 2022. The year Ordinary debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, and suddenly the group that couldn't chart domestically was topping the biggest album chart in the world. Then 12.1 million in 2023, the year 5-Star shattered the all-time K-pop pre-order record, ranked 2nd globally on the IFPI chart behind only Taylor Swift. And Stray Kids received the Prime Minister's commendation from the South Korean government. Then came the Daesongs, not 1, not 2, but a sweep across Mama, the Golden Disc Awards, the Asia Artists Awards, the Korea Grand Music Awards, the K-World Dream Awards, and the Honto Music Awards. Then came the Dominate World Tour, 27 stadiums, 5 continents, 2.15 million tickets, $260 million, a 99.99% sell-through rate, the highest-ranking K-pop tour on Billboard's Global Top 10, first K-pop group at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, first Asian act at Johan Cruyff Arena, first Korean boy group to sell out 2 consecutive nights at Estadio GNP Seguros, first act ever to perform at Rogers Stadium in Toronto. Then came 8 consecutive #1 debuts on the Billboard 200, a record no artist had achieved in the chart's 70-year history. Not Elvis, not the Beatles, not Eminem,
Not Taylor Swift, not BTS, nobody, until Stray Kids. The group with the most #1 albums by any group on the Billboard 200 in the entire 21st century. 14 RIAA certifications, with God's Menu certified platinum, making them only the second K-pop boy group to reach that milestone, plus 7 gold singles and 6 gold albums, the most by any K-pop artist. Members walking Paris Fashion Week as global ambassadors for Louis Vuitton, Versace, and Fendi, and a group that writes and produces over 90% of their own music, with members holding hundreds of credits at KOMCA, and serving as the first fourth-generation idols to become full members of the association. All of this, every record, every stadium, every trophy, every certification, traces back to a trainee who waited 7 years, 2 members who got eliminated on camera, and a debut that the industry dismissed as too noisy to matter. That's the achievement that sits at #1. Not any single record or any single award. It's the arc itself. The distance between where they started and where they stand now is so vast that the only way to measure it is by listing everything in between and realizing that the list keeps growing. Stray Kids didn't just silence the haters. They built something so large, so undeniable, and so relentlessly documented by the numbers themselves that the hate became irrelevant. Not because it was argued against, but because it was simply outgrown. And the scariest part for anyone still doubting, they're not done.